we are so pleased to welcome here tonight, telling a true story that she tells us was her husband's story, told by his permission. Please welcome Emily Corcoran.
Once upon a time in the 1980s in Southern California, there were two best friends, Kevin and David. They met in the lab, the computer lab at Orange Coast Community College. David was helping the professor who ran the lab, studying computer programming. And Kevin came up and asked for some help with his computer program. Well, they found they had a lot in common, and they began their friendship from that day forward. Well, after they finished their studies, they became consultants, and they started to live as roommates. Well, they journeyed around from place to place and eventually ended up in Surf City, USA. Yes, Huntington Beach. They rented a house, and Kevin had a dilemma. The landlord did not allow pets. Kevin had a dog, not any normal dog at all. It was half a Great Dane and half a Golden Retriever. So this is not a small dog. It's not a medium-sized dog. It's a big dog. And its fur was long and orange and wavy. It looked like a tiger. So Kevin did what you would do as an owner of a dog. You name the dog Tiger. But what do you do when your landlord says no pets? Well, you call up another friend that has a big backyard in Westminster, the home of Little Saigon. His friend Walter, dressed like a cowboy, cowboy boots, cowboy hat, the whole 10 yards. And his wife, Linda, who loved dressing in the 60s style. You know, tie-dye, all those long flowing dresses, long hair. Linda and Walter had 2 kids under the age of 4.
Yikes.
And what's better than a peanut butter and jelly sandwich than a dog and kids? So, Kevin and Walter struck a deal. Walter would take care of Tiger. And Tiger got a new family. He got this big backyard with a tall fence. But no one told Kevin that Walter collected cars from the 50s and 60s. Now, I know you're thinking classic cars. These were the cars that he always intended to fix up. Never got around to it. But in a 2-car garage, there just wasn't enough room for all his cars. So what do? You park it in the backyard. I mean, no one's going to see it from the street because of the big tall fence. When Tiger was introduced to his 2 kids, though, the 2 kids, Zeus, because the little boy was so handsome, and Rainbow, because the little girl brought so much color into her parents' life, they were terrified. You've heard about monsters. To the kids, this dog was a monster. He towered over those children. They wanted nothing to do with the dog. So the dog, gentle soul, wouldn't have hurt them. Doesn't even hurt a fly. He was put in the backyard. He was cared for, but he was a lonely dog. Smart dog. Now in Westminster, if you've been there, you know that it gets hot in Westminster. Lots of concrete and lots of sunny days. And this dog had a lot of hair, so it did not come with a doghouse. But there's all these cars in this backyard, so the dog thought, I'll make my own doghouse. The first car that Tiger started working on, shall I say under, was a 1966 Ford Fairlane. Four-door sedan with stacked headlights, round like grapefruits, and it was tan. It's a very important color in this story. You see, the dog walked all the way around that car and decided the first place it was going to make its doghouse was right between those two front wheels. So it started digging underneath. It's a big dog, it had a big hole. So it dug and it dug and dug, and finally it could get underneath the car. But it dug so much that car started to sink a little bit. So what does a dog do? It digs some more. It dug and dug and dug. It sunk some more. Well, the dog gave up on the front end and went on the back end. And then it did one side and then the other side. And the dog kept digging until that car was buried in the ground all the way to the lower level of the windows.
Oh, wow.
And then it started on the next car. There had to be 15 cars in that backyard. The dog was not done burying them all when a neighbor called up the city of Westminster and complained about Walter's backyard. Well, what does the city do? They send out an inspector. Well, you couldn't see anything from the street. The fence was, good 5.5, 6 foot tall. So the inspector brought a ladder. Propped that ladder up against the fence, crawled up on it, looked over. Yep, they're in violation of city ordinance. You can't store cars in your backyard, even if they can't be seen from the street. Inspector went back, and Walter got a letter from the city.
Oh, no.
One of those, you gotta clean up your backyard. Walter sued for violation of his constitutional rights. But while all this legal wrangling went on, he had to do something with those cars. So he calls up Kevin and says to him on the phone, "Kevin, I've been taking care of Tiger. I gotta do something with my cars. I want you to take one of them." Kevin had a deal, so he had to take a car. There was a 2-car garage at this house in Surf City, USA, and they were only using one space. This happened early Wednesday morning, and both of Kevin and David worked different schedules. So, it is about 10:30 in the morning. Kevin comes into the kitchen. David had just got done finishing a long night of programming. It was his day off. He was in his robe, drinking coffee, just woke up. Kevin comes in and he says, "David, I have this dog, Tiger. Did you know that he's been burying cars?" David looks at him and he's thinking, "I've only had one cup of coffee."
Right.
"Kevin, you've told me a lot of tall tales. You told me about a chicken that you own that flew over your house. I believed you then. You came out later and said it wasn't true. You told me about the cat that you own that went on the NASA space shuttle, went all the way up to the moon and came all the way back and lived to tell the tale. You stole that from the newspaper. And now you're telling me that your dog Tiger buries cars. Well, I'm calling it. You're telling me a fib, I'm not buying it." Well, you can believe it or not, but there's a tow truck coming at noon with one of Walter's cars. I want you to help him park it in the garage. I have to go to work. It's your day off. And so they agreed. And while David poured himself that second cup of coffee, he looked at the clock, and sure enough, noon came and he heard the roar of a truck engine. The tow truck always has a distinct sound when it comes. And sure enough, right behind the tow truck was that 1966 tan Ford Fairlane with a mud line up the side. All 4 sides of the car covered with mud. David goes out, opens the garage door. He helps direct the tow truck driver to help park that car in the garage. Tow truck driver unhooks those chains, and And then he comes and looks at David, and he looks like he's burning to say something. You know, there was something he had to get out. And then he says, "It's the darndest thing. That car was buried. I had a hell of a time getting it out. Who would bury a car?" And David's looking at the car in the garage with the mud line all the way up to the bottom of the window. Looks a long time at that car. He looks back at the tow truck driver, stares a long time before he speaks. He's thinking in his head, "I didn't believe Kevin when he said Tiger buried the car. I don't think he's gonna believe it either." So then David then says, "Damned if I know. It takes all kinds, doesn't it?"